When he showed up at my game, I was like so mad.
The 1990s will forever be remembered as the era that turned basketball into global mythology, an age of giants who seemed immortal, unshakable, engineered for greatness. But behind that myth was a shadow the world rarely looked into, a shadow made of broken families, children lost in silence, and men celebrated by millions while the people closest to them were left fighting battles alone. The NBA knew how to build icons. They knew how to polish images, protect brands, and elevate players into cultural gods. What they did not know, what they often refused to confront, was the wreckage left in the lives of women and children connected to those gods. It was an era shaped by money, pressure, fame, and an entire system unprepared for the psychological hurricane that hit athletes who grew from poverty into wealth almost overnight. Young men barely out of their teens were given millions, power, women, access, attention, and immunity. They were praised for their bodies but never taught how to use their hearts. They were celebrated for their dominance but never challenged about their responsibility. And so the line between success and self-destruction blurred quietly, almost invisibly, while the world focused only on the highlights. Among these stories, Karl Malone stands as the most shocking and unsettling, a story that today would end a career instantly, yet in the 90s barely made a ripple. Malone was not merely a star, he was to the prototype of the American sports hero. But behind the crafted persona was a truth so disturbing that its survival as a minor footnote remains one of the NBA's biggest moral failures. In 1983, when Malone was 20 years old, he impregnated a 13-year-old girl. Not someone slightly underage, not a gray area, she was a child by every legal, moral, and human standard. When the baby was born, Malone denied paternity until a test proved otherwise. And then, nothing, no involvement. No emotional accountability. The court ordered him to pay only $125 per week, an amount absurdly small even then, an insult to the responsibility he carried. He didn't even pay consistently. As Malone skyrocketed into superstardom, as he became one half of one of the greatest duos in NBA history, as he earned tens of millions and appeared in commercials, his son Demetrius Bell grew up without him. Bell became an NFL player, a full-grown man with a life of his own. And yet he said plainly, I don't have a relationship with him. I never have. And it wasn't just Demetrius. Malone fathered twins with a high school girlfriend, denied paternity again, dodged involvement again, and only when the law cornered him did he step forward financially. Emotionally, he remained missing for years. The children grew up learning to separate the man on the screen from the man in their lives. And imagine the emotional calculus, how it feels to see your father adored by millions while to you he is a stranger. How it feels to watch him lift weights on TV, hear commentators praise his discipline, and wonder why that discipline didn't include showing up for you. By the late 2000s and 2010s, Malone attempted reconciliation. But children do not forget the years when their father's silence was louder than any applause. Reconciliation is not a clean slate, it is a compromise with the past. Malone's story is the clearest symbol of the era's sickness. Fame had become a shield, and the league had become too invested in the myth to confront the man behind it. The 1990s NBA was a landscape filled with young men stepping into worlds they were never emotionally prepared for. Greg Minor is a lesser-known name to modern fans, but his story echoes the same pattern: sudden fame, emotional immaturity, legal chaos, and children caught in the aftermath. Minor was not a megastar, but his experience reveals the everyday version of the problem, the version without headlines, without documentaries, without social media outrage. He entered the NBA with 3 children already born from his long-term relationship with Celestine Rowan. For a while, things appeared stable. He visited, he supported, he played the role with some consistency. But fame doesn't just change bank accounts, it changes routines, relationships, priorities, identities. In 1996, an assault charge involving Rowan became the breaking point. Whatever the internal fractures had been, they now became public. By 1997, court filings show he simply stopped showing up. No more visits. No gradual fade out. Just a clean, painful vanishing act. He made one phone call in years, and then disappeared from their lives entirely. Imagine being those children, knowing your father is alive, successful, employed, present elsewhere, but not present with you. The emotional damage of abandonment is not loud, It is quiet. It is the slow, daily erosion of trust, security, and identity. And for the mother left behind, the burden is doubled. She becomes both parents. She becomes the shield and the sword. She is forced to answer questions no one prepares you for. And the hardest part is that she rarely has the answers, because the truth is both devastating and simple. Some men do not leave because of their children. They leave because they cannot face themselves. The NBA never spoke about these stories. It wasn't that they didn't know. Teams knew. Agents knew. Journalists whispered. Lawyers filed. Women fought in courtrooms while players warmed up on hardwood courts thousands of miles away. But the league's priority was image. Protect the brand. Protect the stars. Protect the story being sold to the world. Created generations of emotional orphans who grew up believing their only connection to their fathers was through the glowing television screen broadcasting triple-doubles and all-star games. The saddest part, many players were not evil, they were overwhelmed. They came from broken homes themselves. They came from childhoods without fathers, from neighborhoods where emotional literacy was a luxury no one could afford. They were raised to be tough, stoic, unbreakable. Vulnerability was weakness. Feelings were liabilities. They learned dominance, not empathy. They learned independence, not accountability. So when fame handed them power, they reverted to the emotional DNA they grew up with. Leave before you're left. Distance yourself before someone gets close. Use relationships as escape, not connection. They didn't know how to be fathers because they never had one. This is why Malone, Miner, and countless others of that era share similar stories, not because they were monsters, but because they were emotionally unequipped men with unimaginable access and zero guidance. The league taught them how to deal with double teams, not how to deal with fatherhood. Agents taught them how to negotiate contracts, not how to navigate relationships. Coaches taught them plays, not responsibility. The entire system built athletes, not men. And as a result, an entire generation of children was left to pick up the emotional debris. Because the truth is, the NBA of the 80s and 90s was a world built on pressure and performance. A young player could be drafted at 20, handed millions, praised as the future of a franchise, pushed in front of cameras, and expected to carry the hopes of an entire city. Yet no one stopped to ask whether he knew how to communicate, how to love, how to be present, how to handle loneliness, how to face temptation, or how to provide stability for the people depending on him. But heartbreak, trauma, accountability, there was no playbook for that. Many of these men came from broken homes themselves. Some grew up without fathers, without structure, without emotional foundation. Suddenly they were surrounded by women, money, attention, alcohol, nightlife, and a constant stream of validation. They were praised for aggression on the court, then expected to be gentle at home. They were encouraged to take risks in the game, then judged harshly for taking risks in their personal lives. They were treated like gods in arenas but were still flawed, confused, 20-year-olds walking into adulthood at full speed with no brakes, and because no one taught them emotional discipline, they mistook popularity for maturity. They mistook attention for affection. They mistook physical ability for personal growth. They didn't understand commitment because no one ever modeled it for them. They didn't understand fatherhood because the world never asked them to, until it was too late. Stories like Malone's, like Miner's, like so many others, are not anomalies, they are symptoms of an entire era. The silence of the league, the lack of mentorship, the absence of personal development programs, and the cultural acceptance of boys will be boys, created a dangerous ecosystem where mistakes multiplied, families fractured, and consequences were delayed until they were impossible to ignore. And when those consequences finally came, court orders, paternity tests, lawsuits, angry teenagers seeking answers, the world judged these men as if they had been fully developed, fully prepared, fully aware of the damage they were causing. They were products of a machine that profited off their athleticism while neglecting their humanity. But now, the silence is breaking. Social media has changed the landscape. Children have platforms. Mothers have archives. Truth moves faster than image management. What was once hidden is now impossible to bury. And when we revisit the 90s, not through documentaries celebrating championships, but through the lives of the people left behind, we finally see the full picture. The era was glorious on the court and heartbreaking off of it. It was defined by greatness and by wounds the world never acknowledged. This narrative is not meant to villainize players or glorify suffering. It is meant to reveal the humanity buried under fame, to show how the world can adore a man while his own children live in confusion, and to confront the uncomfortable truth that sometimes greatness comes at a price paid by people who never signed up for it. Because behind every statistic, every highlight, every contract negotiation splashed across ESPN, there are human beings who never chose the spotlight but were dragged into its glare. Children who learned to spell their last names from the back of jerseys worn by strangers. Mothers who held together families with tape and prayer while the world celebrated the man who walked away from them. Young boys who sat alone in dark rooms, wondering why the father the world worshipped never once came through their own front door. This story is also about the quiet moments of reckoning. The phone calls made years too late. The apologies whispered through tears. The courtroom confrontations that broke people but also forced them to grow. The sons who spent decades without a father but still offered forgiveness when they finally met. The daughters who inherited their father's strength even when they never inherited his presence. The mothers who healed not because they were asked to, but because they refused to let. There is a painful symmetry in these tales. Men who rose to unimaginable heights in the public eye while falling apart in their private lives. The same discipline that created champions on the court somehow crumbled in the face of fatherhood. The same courage that allowed them to take the final shot abandoned them when responsibility came knocking. They could face a roaring stadium but not a crying child. They could confront opponents but not their own reflection, because in the arena, everything made sense. The lines were painted, the rules were written, the goals were clear. You trained, you executed, you won or you lost. But life outside the arena had no referees, no coaches shouting instructions, no film sessions to correct mistakes. Fatherhood didn't come with scouting reports. Relationships didn't come with game plans. And so, when these men found themselves staring at consequences instead of defenders, many froze. They reverted to the instincts they knew best: avoid, escape, compartmentalize, perform, repeat. They were overwhelmed human beings leaning on the only coping mechanism they understood: running into the game, running into the noise, running into the identity that made them feel powerful, wanted, invincible. Basketball became a shield, a sanctuary, a place where they never had to confront the chaos they created. But the tragedy is that fame magnifies everything, including flaws. With every contract signed and every endorsement added, the gap between who they were and who the world believed them to be widened. The spotlight made them look bigger, brighter, stronger. And slowly, painfully, they began to believe the illusion. They mistook applause for approval. They mistook success for maturity. They mistook visibility for accountability. Cultivated where it mattered most. And while they soared, their children lived in the shadows of their myths. They heard their father's name before they ever heard his voice. They watched highlights instead of bedtime stories. They collected headlines instead of hugs. They learned early that the world could celebrate a man who barely acknowledged them. The disconnect became its own wound, one that shaped childhoods, identities, and futures in ways no box score could ever measure. The symmetry becomes even more tragic in hindsight. Many of these athletes spent their careers chasing moments, championships, accolades, the feeling of being unstoppable, only to realize later that the moments they missed were the ones that truly defined them. A child's first steps. A whispered, "I love you." A late-night conversation. A hand held through tears. These were the milestones that no trophy could replace, no record could overshadow, and when age inevitably came, when the legs slowed, the cheers faded, the lights dimmed, they were forced to confront the silence they had spent years outrunning. Some tried to repair the damage. Some succeeded. But all of them eventually learned that the real measure of a man isn't written in banners hanging from rafters, it's written in the hearts of the people who waited for him. The symmetry, in the end, is a mirror, one that reflects not just the rise of the athlete, but the fall of the man behind the jersey. It is heartbreaking, but it is as the years passed, life did what life always does, it forced truth to the surface. Pride faded. Excuses evaporated. Age humbled the strongest of them. And somewhere between broken families and broken careers, these men began looking back, not as icons, but as fathers searching for the pieces of relationships they once neglected. Some rebuilt. Painfully, awkwardly, inconsistently, but they tried. Others are still trying. A few never will. That is the uncomfortable reality of humanity. Redemption is offered, but never guaranteed. So when we tell these stories, we are not choosing sides, we are acknowledging complexity. We are shining light in places most people prefer to keep dark. We are reminding the world that greatness is not always clean, and legacy is not measured only in rings, banners, or trophies, but in the quiet, unseen moments when no cameras are on and no fans are cheering. And in the end, the real story is not about basketball. It is about the children who grew up watching the fathers they never met, the children who kept scrapbook photos because they couldn't keep memories, the children who learned adulthood without guidance, who learned strength without example, who learned love without role models. The children who exist not as footnotes in sports history, but as living proof that the loudest arenas still cannot drown out the quiet ache of abandonment. Because the truth is simple, championships fade, highlight reels grow old, jerseys are forgotten, but the silence of a missing father echoes through a lifetime.